Everyone, welcome. We're going to start in just a second.
Hey, everybody.
Oops.
Good to see you.
Everybody, I think, is muted right now, but you guys can unmute if you have. I'm just making sure we're on YouTube, and then we're going to start. Okay, we're all set there. Learning each day how to do this correctly. We'll wait another minute or two as we few people on. So if anybody wants to say hi, I don't know if you've met everybody, but I hope everybody is doing well and
hey,
safe
everybody.
and sound. You are the third interview we had. We interviewed Jonathan Rabb about his book, but on a different day. No, fourth. And we had Tom Kohler. We did Jessica Libos, and now Billy Hester. And I think many of you know Billy from a wide variety of things. So what we do, Billy, is we will interview here, and then we put it on YouTube so people can watch it anytime they want. Billy's church, which we'll talk about in a second, is very familiar with recording, as they've been recording their services for years. How many years have you done it now?
Gosh,
Since I've been here.
Maybe 20 or so.
20 years. So
Yeah, like
we
that.
just started,
maybe
but
longer.
For 20. So we'll give everybody about 2 minutes. So if you guys want to ask any questions or say anything right now, go right ahead.
I need to say we've had an advantage because Pat Prokop's a member of the church, and y'all all know Pat from his days at WTOC, so he helped us a lot with that.
I'm sure does not hurt.
Yeah.
Oh, and we should ask Larry to help us, because Larry Silverman is a great guy.
Oh yeah,
really great guy. But we've got Jason Rich, who's been doing ours. So he's done an incredible job.
I'm shining, Robert. Did you powder down?
I always powder down.
See, I didn't powder today.
Welcome.
You know, after having a career in entertainment, you'd think I'd know better. Maybe it's that light is so bright. Maybe I'll do this.
You don't look bad.
The head shining. Well,
that does a little bit better.
Is that better? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Cool. I'm learning stuff.
Yeah, you're doing much better. You've been forced to learn Zoom, as all of us have as well. I'd certainly used it before, but I was not that familiar with it as I am now, using it all the time.
Where are you wearing your hat?
Come on in, everybody.
My hair's messed up.
Your hair looks beautiful, Jeff.
Oh yeah.
Even if it's messed up, it looks beautiful. That's all I'm saying.
Reverend Billy, we want to thank you very much. We're a fan of yours on the Hester program. The four of you gentlemen have given us
Lots of laughs.
lots of laughs and comfort on Wednesday afternoons.
Thanks for being part of it. Yeah, my sister said, y'all ought to call that show Humor and Hope.
Yes.
That's good.
She said, that's what y'all give us, humor and hope. So,
I told the rabbi you should be an act and go on the road.
He is. Right
don't
now.
tempt us. Don't tempt us.
Well, we'll be off for the month of July. I found that out when it was announced during the actual last one.
Right.
So it's really funny as I'm sitting off. Oh, everybody learned just as well as I did. All right, well, welcome everybody. We'll go ahead and begin. I'm going to keep everybody on. If you can just mute yourself until we have questions, but we're going to invite people to have questions. Again, this continues Rabbi interviews, as we're interviewing people who've had an effect on Savannah and on the Jewish community, whether they're Jewish or not. And today we have the Reverend Billy Hester, and I'm going to read a little bit of his biography. Born in Louisville, Kentucky, he was a middleweight boxer who won the Kentucky Middleweight Championship title in 1954. Defeated George Wilson. Maybe that's a different person. No, that's a different one. Sorry.
Oh my goodness.
Billy Hester, as we all know, is the minister at Asbury. He's a former Broadway star. He's from our wonderful city. He revitalized that entire community almost single-handedly, creating a place where everyone in the Methodist world felt comfortable. After spending years on Broadway, he came back down here. He has a wonderful wife and 2 beautiful children. They're both adults now. He also does so many things for the community. He is one of the deans of the clergy world, as he has been on every organization imaginable. Not only does he have a good voice, but he's also just a good human being. And also, of course, we've been tripling with his church and a mosque for the last 8 or 9 years. And so he has come by every time we've done it. And of course, so personable. Many of you have met. Several of our congregants in our congregation have spouses at his congregation, and obviously vice versa. So it's a real pleasure and privilege to welcome Billy. And Billy, this is everyone. And as we know, this will be put on YouTube. It's on YouTube right now, as well as Zoom, and it'll stay on YouTube for anybody who wants to. So Billy, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna begin by asking some questions, and then I'll invite everybody else to as well. But the first question obviously is gonna be, can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and what led you to come back to Savannah to join the ministry?
Sure. Thank you, Robert. And thank you, everybody, for letting me be part of this. It's great. I grew up, and a lot of people from Mikvah Israel know this. They've heard this from me before, but I grew up right on the corner of 65th Street in Abercorn, 101 East 65th Street. I pass by that all the time now and say, I cut that lawn 1,000 times. And that's not very far from the JEA, of course. And went to school at Jacob G. Smith, which is right down the block from us in that neighborhood, and Wilder Junior High. And it was interesting neighborhood. It was like a melting pot. My best friend was Catholic, had a lot of Greek friends, a lot of Jewish friends. It was just Baptist friends. It was a melting pot of people that all went to school together. We played baseball, football, and basketball together. And I'll never forget when I moved to New York, when I moved to Manhattan, and of course that really is a melting pot. It didn't feel different to me because 65th Street was a melting pot. And I've just always, I was always jealous of my Jewish friends because of Hanukkah. They seemed to get more presents than I did growing up. They had more days to celebrate, and just very fond. I was blessed with an incredible childhood. And those were the days when you put your books, you do your homework, put your books on, and just play in the neighborhood all day until it was supper time. And so we had a whole bunch of kids in that neighborhood who were just fun to play with. And so very fond of that. And then church was a very big part of my life. My dad died when I was 4. He had a heart attack when he was 35. And so it was my mother, sister, and me. And so that neighborhood community was very important for me. The other community that was important was my church family. I was raised at Epworth Methodist Church over on Bull Street, not far from the public library. And that was a second family for me. And a lot of those men at the church were like adopted fathers for me and helped me out a lot. And so that was an important community for me. Sports were very important. Those teams, those were important communities also. And it was in church, by the way, and in school where I discovered my passion for theater and for music. And that took me to Valdosta State to get a degree in theater. And then, if you wanted to have a profession, it was either New York or LA, and LA was more for film. And if you wanted to do more live theater, it was to go to New York. And I had done 2 summers of summer stock before I moved to New York, one in Vermont and one in New Jersey. So I had met some people who were moving to New York too, and moved into one with an actor friend, and happened to move into an apartment on 29th Street between Madison and Park Avenue, a real tiny apartment. In fact, he had the small bedroom and I kind of lived in the small living room. And right down the block on 29th Street and 5th Avenue was a church called Marble Collegiate Church. And of course, I was kind of looking for a church, a faith community. And I noticed on the board of that church was the name Norman Vincent Peale. I said, I've heard of that guy. and, did some research and, remembered that he had wrote the book, The Power of Positive Thinking. And so I explored that church and really loved it. And what I liked about it, one thing, it was very diverse. So the faith community was very diverse. Even met some Jewish people worshiping there who loved Dr. Peel's message. And he was one of the first to combine faith with psychology. Like psychology wasn't opposite of faith, and therapy wasn't bad. In fact, I eventually would join that staff many years later, and the senior minister who replaced Dr. Peel encouraged all of the staff to be in therapy. So that's the kind of environment it was, and was one reason I wanted to come back down south too, because I wanted to share kind of when I grew up here, like counseling therapy, there was a big stigma attached to it. You had to really be messed up if you went to a counselor or a therapist. And that was one thing I wanted to try to bring this kind of new perspective down south in my hometown. But when I originally went to New York, I was in theater, and kind of one of the main things I did was part of a company called the Light Opera of Manhattan. And it kind of was in the chorus, and then eventually became what's called Equity, which is the union for actors, and then started doing the lead roles at Loom, the Light Opera of Manhattan. And we did shows like The Pirates of Penzance, HMS Pinafore, Desert Song, things like that. Another big part, if you need to break in, just break in, that's fine, it won't hurt my feelings. But another big part of why I was drawn to Marble Collegiate Church, every Monday night, they had a support group for actors. Mondays, back in those days, all the Broadway shows were dark on Mondays. So that was kind of the meeting night. I think these days, well, not these days, but usually now there are some shows that open on Mondays. But we would meet on Mondays, and it was, 99% of the time as an actor, you're out of work. So it's wonderful to have this kind of prayer and support group of actors. And you'd also learn things from each other about agents and how to do your resume, or who's a good voice teacher, that kind of things. But we'd also have a spiritual element about it also to kind of keep us going and to keep plugging along. I had been part of that group for about a year, and had been out of work a little bit, and then got a lucky break through a woman named Mae Questel. When you get a chance, sometime Google Mae Questel. An incredible character actress. She was the voice of Betty Boop in Olive Oil. She was also in a lot of films, in that Chevy Chase Christmas movie. She's Aunt Bethany in that movie. And so, but that was Mae Questel. I met her once. She had me and a friend over for lunch, and she said, "Billy, who's your agent?" I said, "I don't have an agent." And she says, "Well, I tell you what, I'll ask my agent to send you out on something." I said, "Wow, that'd be nice." But I didn't think I'd hear anything from it. 4 days later, I get a call from her agent, and he sends me out for an audition for the musical Pippin. Well, I had played Pippin when I was like 18 in Savannah when our little theater did it. So I knew the show real well. And so I was excited that they had sent me for this. This was the first thing this agent would send me out on. Well, lo and behold, I got it. I got the lead role. And it was cast in New York, but it was being performed at a theater called Theater by the Sea in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. It was an Equity theater there. So 2 weeks before that audition, we had a special actors fellowship group at the church where we were trying to reach out to more people to invite them there. We usually averaged about 25 people, but for this special event, we had about 50 people. And there was this girl there that I was really drawn to. I said, boy, I'd really like to meet her. but she looked like a real pro in the business. I was still kind of a rookie. In fact, they used her picture and resume. It was her first time there. They used her picture and resume as an example of what one should look like. And I said, boy, this woman's way out of my league. And so I didn't introduce myself. I said, well, next week, on the next Monday, if she's there to our regular meeting, then I will have the nerve to introduce myself to her. She didn't show up. So there goes that. Well, 2 weeks later, I get cast as Pippin. And so I called the agent up, and this was being performed in New Hampshire, and I was blessed to have a car, and most actors in New York didn't have a car. I called my agent up. I said, Jack, I'm going to be driving from New York to Portsmouth. Do you think there's anybody in the cast who would like to drive up with me? He said, well, I've got the name and number of the girl playing opposite you. Why don't you call her and ask her, the lead role? So I call her. She was actually not in New York. She was doing what's called an industrial in LA, which is a kind of a production that big companies have, like McDonald's has for their employees. And it's like a weekend event. So this gal had gone out there to do this and was coming right back to New York. But she said, yeah, I'll ride up to you, right up to New Hampshire with you. And I think most of you kind of see it coming, what's happening. She opens the door, and it was that girl I wanted to meet 2 weeks before at Actors Fellowship. We got married 4 years later, and we got 4 kids now. And I became more and more just taken by the ministry at Marble Collegiate. Its inclusiveness. It's not, it didn't beat people over the head with the Bible. It was about love and joy. And I said, I wish I had grown up kind of like with this kind of perspective. And I felt led to go to seminary. Also, Sherry and I were getting more serious, and we're thinking about getting married and having a family. And I said, we saw so many people who were couples in the acting world who their relationship, they got a divorce or something because it's so tough. A lot of people, you don't get jobs often, so you feel like you have to take what's called a national tour or bus and truck out of town. And so you're split a lot. So, I said, Sherry was a lot better than me in theater. So I said, you stay in theater, let me try seminary in the ministry. And it all worked out. I kind of found my niche. And she continued acting and was in things like Singing in the Rain on Broadway, things like that. But that's it's been quite a ride. We had our first child in New York at Lenox Hill Hospital, and then it being single and newlyweds, a couple in New York's different when you have a child. It's just very different. Taking the stroller up and down the subways and all of that. So we said, also what happened, I was on a maybe didn't say that. I ended up going to Princeton Seminary, which is an hour outside of Manhattan. And that way Sherry could still audition and do shows in New York. And she also did some in Philadelphia because Princeton's kind of right in between the two. I was on staff there for about 4 years, 3 or 4 years. And we were ready, with the child. It was kind of hard in New York, but the senior minister at Asbury, at Marble Collegiate, who replaced Norman Vincent Peale, said, Billy, I'm the preacher here, and you need to learn to preach, and you need to be a more well-rounded minister. It was a large staff, and so I kind of focused on singles and married couples in the Actors Fellowship. And so he kind of kicked me out of the nest so I could develop all the other skills I needed to do. And that's how I ended up coming back to Savannah. I was the associate minister at Wesley Monumental, right next door to Mikveh Israel, for 2 years. And then I heard, so I was right next to y'all again for 2 years. And then I was ready. I didn't want to take a church, be a senior minister right away, because Sherry's from Maryland. She was born in Baltimore. She went to school at Northwestern in Chicago. and then moved to New York. And I was really worried about how she would adjust to the South. And we had a first child. I didn't want to take on a church by myself, but after 2 years, I was ready. And that's when I heard that Asbury, our denomination was going to close Asbury Memorial. You know, the white flight had happened starting in the 60s to the suburbs, and that church had not been creative about getting people there and just started shrinking from the late 60s. And the denomination started trying to do all kinds of things to try to bring it back in the 70s and 80s. But by 1993, they said, we've tried everything, we're going to close it now. So I heard about it, and I'm drawn to urban ministry. And I said, I would really like to try to see if I could bring that church back. They only had about 25 or 30 members there at that time, and their youngest member was 66. And what happens in my denomination, you're appointed to a church, and the bishop and what's called the cabinet was going to appoint me to a church in Tifton, Georgia. Well, first of all, I couldn't imagine my wife Sherry in Tifton, Georgia. I've nothing against Tifton, it's just not Sherry. And I really wanted Asbury, and kind of had another wow moment, just kind of like in how Sherry and I met. We're in the South Georgia Conference, that Savannah is in our Methodist denomination. That conference starts from Macon and goes to the Florida-Georgia line. And then of course, above that's the North Georgia Conference. We always shared a bishop with the North Georgia Conference, but right before I came to Savannah, they decided that South Georgia should have their own bishop from now on. And so they brought in a guy named Richard Looney. And you can't be you can't be the bishop of a conference you're from. They brought this guy in from Kentucky. So Bishop Looney's his name, a crazy name, right? Looney. So I'm wanting to go to Asbury Memorial. The denomination is wanting to send us to Tifton. Well, in my Actors Fellowship group in New York was a gal named Teresa London. London wasn't her real name. She didn't want to try to make it as an actress with her given name. Her given name was Teresa Looney. The new bishop in South Georgia, one of my best friends, was his daughter in New York. So I actually met him before he became a bishop, because Teresa got married in New York and he came up there of course, for the wedding and everything. So since I knew him, and he kind of knew my background, he said, okay, Billy, I'll let you try Asbury Memorial. So that was in 1993. Sorry I've gone on for so long, but it's been quite a ride.
That's what you're supposed to do. The idea is so it's really interesting to see that most people would want to go to the church that's already established, but some people want to kind of reinvigorate ones that are not. And certainly you created a whole new idea as to what a church would be. And so what did you do to really invigorate this church using what you learned in New York? It's very obvious now, but probably in 1993 it was not.
Well, I obviously had some ideas to try to do, but also I really respected those 30 members who hung in there, because they had been already asked before I was appointed there. They had been told to go find another faith community, but they said, no, we want to try to make it. We want to try to make it. And in fact, one of my members, I'll never forget, Elizabeth Larry, she said, Billy, do anything you want to, just get us back. I think about a year later, she regretted saying that, but I did get them back. But it was like back in those days, our neighborhood's a lot better now. All of the work that's been done on the streets and everything. But when I first came there, the city had designated it, they called it Area C, because of high crime and low income. And so it was, okay, how do you get people to visit a church in a tough neighborhood? And so the only thing we knew to do is our strength was theater. And so what Sherry and I did, we did 2 musicals a year in our social hall. These were community auditions. Anybody in the community could audition. And so we would get people who sang, who auditioned, and then we'd say, hey, have you got a church? You want to sing in the choir? So that's kind of how we built a lot of the membership, and especially like the choir. The shows were pretty good shows, and we packed the social hall every time we'd have shows, and we'd extend them. I don't know if any of y'all saw those from a long time ago, but we'd do things like Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, the Pirates of Penzance, Working, and just Man of La Mancha, all kinds of musicals. And then a lot of people who didn't have a church who came to the show said, you know, I might try this on a Sunday. And so that's kind of how we slowly built it up through theater, to the point I used to direct most of the shows. And but then the church started building. I had to do more programming, and I kind of had to let go of it and give it to a little committee at the church. And I'm not so involved with it anymore.
And it's interesting because the first person we interviewed in one of these interviews was Jonathan Rabb, who was Don Quixote in one of your productions of Man of La Mancha. So he, of course, has a fabulous voice. And not only that, I'm sorry, Billy.
Well, I was just going to say, Jonathan and I had a direct, real immediate connection, because I don't know if y'all are aware of it. Jonathan, that company I worked with in New York, the Light Opera in Manhattan, specialized in Gilbert and Sullivan operettas. Well, Jonathan's a Gilbert and Sullivan specialist. That is his forte. He did a lot of performing of G&S shows. So when we met here in Savannah, he had been in New York doing that. And that was my background. We just immediately were drawn to each other.
Do we have any other questions before I continue on from anybody? You can unmute yourself or raise your hands. If not, we'll continue. But one of the things that I found so incredible is the idea that when Billy came back here, obviously it's a very different city in many ways, but you wanted to be more inclusive for people who had not always had that opportunity and not found a place to worship. So how did that guide you in, recreating your church?
Sure, I will do that. And then there was a hand. So just after.
Oh, I didn't see it. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because a big part of this, Sherry got, one of the draws to coming to Savannah versus to some other parts of South Georgia was we had such a wonderful arts community here and theater. She could get involved in community theater. And so we met a lot. We became friends with people in community theater, and a lot of them didn't have churches. And the reason some of them didn't have churches is they were LGBTQ. And again, at Norman Vincent Peale's church in New York, that wasn't an issue. We welcomed everybody. And so with these people that we got to know in these shows, we said, hey, there's a safe place for you here. Come be with us. So,
right. And Larry Rosendorf had a question for you.
Yeah, Billy, pleasure to meet you. You were so highly recommended by some of the people that had seen you in this quadripartite meeting, I guess, that the rabbi had.
Quadripartite.
They urged us to come on. Jane is over on the side here. Just a couple of things. Did you happen to know when you were at Princeton Seminary, a fellow named Jim Cubie, C-U-B-I-E? Does that name sound?
I don't remember that name. I was there from 1986 to 89.
Yeah, I don't remember when Jim was there, probably a little bit earlier. He's a member here of our community, and he graduated from the seminary.
Oh my goodness.
he practiced, I guess, for a little while preaching, but I think he's went into law. But he and I co-founded a little club here, which you might be interested in, called a little opera club in Sun City.
Oh,
So
I
big opera-
definitely want to meet him.
Yeah.
And yeah, because I probably was there later than he was too, because since it was a second career for me, I kind of went in a little later
Yeah,
too.
we're happy to know now around the grounds of the seminary, the Westminster Choir School, they were taken over by Ryder College, and basically they have a magnificent school there, and we have a part-time residence in New Jersey, and they do a fantastic music program there, for training
Yes.
for all kinds of musicians.
Yes.
But my real question is, you mentioned the name Asbury, and could you tell us a little bit about Asbury and the Methodist? And we're from New Jersey. We live right near Asbury Park.
Yes.
Ocean Grove. Could you connect the dots for us?
You bet. And by the way, Larry, my sister lives in Cranberry, New Jersey.
Okay, that's not
where
far
that
as well.
is, not too
Yeah.
far from Princeton.
You know where it is.
And she talks about Asbury Park a lot. Yeah, let me tell you, this is interesting. So of course, Wesley came to Savannah. Methodist had not been formed yet. He had kind of a tough experience here in Savannah. But by the way, that's another cool thing about, and I love y'all's history too. I mean, I love history, and I grew up here in Savannah, just loving our history here. But so Wesley went back to England after a tough experience here, which was a good thing because he kind of had to hit rock bottom. He was pretty egotistical guy and kind of just saw things one way and everything. But what happened is he hit bottom, and he kept a diary, and he said he had written in his diary, "I went to save the heathens," meaning the Native Americans, "but who's going to save me?" So that's how low he had gotten. Who's going to save me? He was so depressed. He had met a group here called the Moravians. He was really impressed with their faith, and he learned a lot from them. And so when he got back to England, the Methodist movement started. And it was happening here in this country too, but they didn't know how, they couldn't do the sacraments. Two of our main sacraments are baptism and Holy Communion. And you're supposed to have an ordained person lead those, and there was nobody ordained here. So Wesley in England had to he ordained two people to become the first two bishops of our denomination, and he sent them over the ocean to then ordain other people. And the two one was a guy named Thomas Coke, C-O-K-E, and then Francis Asbury. So they were our two bishops. And you might have heard of the company Cokesbury, or you've seen streets called that Cokesbury. That's where that comes from. It's combining Thomas Coke's name with Francis Asbury's name. They were the first two bishops. Asbury, some people say nobody rode a horse more than Francis Asbury. I think there's a big monument of him on a horse in Washington, D.C. And he was this itinerant preacher that would just travel everywhere. And then when the Revolutionary War broke out, most of those clergy ran back to England because they were scared, they wouldn't be looked nicely upon. But Asbury stayed. He kind of hid out and stayed. And then after the war was over, kept the ministry going. So that's why so many Methodist churches are called Asbury. It's for Francis Asbury. And he spent a lot of time all traveling. He came down here, but he spent a lot of time like in the New Jersey area, all around there.
Thank you. And any other questions? One of the most interesting things about Billy today is what's going on, not only in his church or any individual church or house of worship, but what's going on with all of them. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about how you've said many times that this is a new world because the houses of worship are coming together in ways they never had before. Talk a little bit about the change over certainly the last 27 years and how you see it improving, or what are some things we need to improve still?
Right. Yeah, I tell you, it's been very we're going through a lot of tough things, but also the last several years, I've seen a lot of encouraging things. And a lot of it has to do with your rabbi too. He's been a big sign of hope and encouragement for me. But there's a group here in Savannah called the Savannah Alliance of Pastors. You may be familiar with them. Traditionally, that has been an all African American clergy group. Traditionally, not only Black, it has traditionally been all Christian. Well, what's happened with the rise of gun violence and poverty, that group said, well, we can't do it alone. And so they really reached out to other clergy of other faiths and to white clergy. And I've been here, doing this for about 30 years, and I've seen it change so much in a positive way the last 2 or 3 years. Just relationships in general. This Sunday I'm talking about, it's Independence Day weekend, but I think the sermon's going to be about happy interdependence, that, none of us are doing anything. We need each other. And even, the lunch I had today was made by somebody else. And, we're reliant on each other. And it's kind of silly that we don't live that way theologically too, And I'm just so thankful. It's been a big sign of hope for me, seeing us more of this attitude of we're all in this together instead of my team versus your team.
And we've seen a lot of that. I'm proud to be the only non-pastor in the Alliance of Savannah Pastors, by the way. Pride. And we're going to change it to Alliance of Savannah Pastors and one really interesting rabbi, but we decided not to do that. So, and again, what you're seeing, I think even today is a little bit different than even 2 or 3 years ago. As 2 or 3 years ago, we were coming together, but today it's almost as if we're being shoved together because of all the things going on now. What I think, and I'm sure you agree, but I'll hear a little bit more about it, is the work that's been done in the last couple of years. Now that we're in this situation where we see all these protests and all these issues, when different clergy go to these events, they're not meeting each other for the first time and saying, oh, we're just march with you this one time and won't see you anymore. We go to these events and all of a sudden we now know everybody. And if we don't, we start meeting people who are friends of people we knew. And so the camaraderie is much closer because of that.
Really is about building relationships, isn't it? Because you're right. I'd go to these events and I wouldn't know anybody. You wouldn't see them again until the next one, but you didn't have any kind of bridge or connection. But that's changed a lot. We're building relationships, and part of that maybe has a lot to do with technology too, because even with our cell phones, before we had to do all of this because of the virus, we're connecting with each other through cell phones and everything. But I've been just so encouraged about it.
Any questions? Jeff, did you have a question? All right. Now, one of the things I also want to know is, now that you've seen Savannah and the changes, 27 years as an adult, certainly from what it is as a kid, what areas do you think we need to improve upon, not just in Savannah, but in the whole Chatham County and beyond, in Georgia and South Carolina? What are the things we need to do to become better?
Y'all share some of your thoughts with me and let me bounce off of that. I'm curious about y'all too with that.
But we'll come to another question.
Okay.
Anybody have any thoughts on that themselves?
Yeah, somebody. Yeah, go ahead.
Flossie.
Go ahead.
I just got on. Okay. I saw how well the 4 of you connected. I mean, like my husband said, I was just so impressed, the camaraderie and respect. What I'm curious is, you came from spending some time in New York, especially being in the theater. You met a lot of Jewish people before you came down. How is your church as far as open to the Jewish faith and the mixing in services and sharing different programs that they're meeting us and we're experiencing them.
Yeah, most of the people at our church aren't from this area. It's a lot of people who've moved to Savannah. So, but we do have some Savannahans, and I've got to say this too. I'm not sure I could have done, or we could have done what we could have done at that church had I not been from Savannah, because I had a lot of home support from my family. You know, but my first cousin is still one of my main ushers and has been for years. So I've got to say it's been a team effort. But you know, part of our purpose at our church is to be for anybody and everybody. And we have something, I know some of your members come to it. It's something called God on Broadway. We do this every October. Have any of y'all come to this? I know we have a number of Mikveh Israel people come. Okay. So what we do, you know, it used to be like, you know, in a sermon, I would talk about being open and honest and how we need to share our feelings with each other. And so one Sunday I said, you know, and I'd say in the sermon, you know, remember how like Tevye and Goldie have that moment in Fiddler on the Roof, do you love me? Well, the next time I preached the sermon, Sherry and I did the song after the sermon. And so then after we started doing things like that, we said, well, wait a minute. Fiddler on the Roof also has that beautiful prayer, the song Sabbath Prayer, you know, and it's all about the challenge of those wonderful traditions, but with change. Wonder if we use the whole theme and some of the songs from Fiddler on the Roof in the service. So we started with Fiddler, I think, was our first year with some others. And so every Sunday, so we've been doing this for about 12 years now. So every Sunday in October, we use a different musical with its songs and themes from the songs, like Les Miserables, for instance. Wow, how powerful that show is in the music. So our choir, like with cats and everything, and hair, like our choir will dress up like cats when we do the Cat Sunday. And hair, it's so funny because we see people in their 70s and everything dressed in their old hippie outfits that they used to wear, you know, a long time ago. And, but the choir gets pumped up about it, but they, you know, it sounds a little tacky, but they end up being our most powerful services because those songs, those themes help transport us to a place deep inside ourselves that we need to talk about, and the music itself can transform you, as you all know. And so we usually on a Sunday, a regular Sunday, have about 250, 260 people. The sanctuary seats 500. And when we do our God on Broadway services, that's usually packed. It's usually about a 500, you know, attendance. And a lot of people come, and it's fine. We have a lot of people, especially in God on Broadway, who are members of other faith communities who come just what they call for their Asbury fix. And, you know, and usually during God on Broadway. So we do, I don't know, we've done, you know, what's the Avenue Q? Are any of you familiar with the puppet musical Avenue Q? It's puppets, but let me tell you, that show can preach. There's a song in there called Everybody's a Little Bit Racist. Wow, bingo, you're right there to one of our main themes. So of what we need to talk about today. So it's been, and what's wonderful, you know, I've been there since 1993, and how do you stay in something for so long and keep it fresh? You got to have some fun with it, you know? And so that's helped me kind of endure and keep going and be excited about it too.
Well, our
Come any
synagogue,
Sunday. Yeah.
we try not to have any fun at our synagogue. So we'll leave that with you guys. But I think Larry Rosendorf had a question.
Yeah, actually, I had two parts to the question. Are any of your God on Broadway on YouTube or anything that we can see them?
They are. They are. We've had a little problem for some reason. Pat Prokop helps figure that stuff out for us and put us on there. I noticed we were having some problems pulling some of them up, and but they're on there. It was such a shame. If you go on our website, you'll see a link for God on Broadway, and our first 7 years were on there, and something happened with a computer that wiped out all of the files. So I think the last 4 or 5 years of God on Broadway are still on there. And so there's usually about 4 of those each year, because there are either 4 or 5 Sundays in October, and there's a different show each week. I know, and you might be careful too. There's at least 1 year where we couldn't meet because we all evacuated because of the hurricane. And so we had to have it in November or something, one of the musicals. So if you'll go on our website, you can kind of see it. Guys and Dolls, I think, was one we did last year too. That was fun.
Yeah, hopefully you still might even have a copy on VHS that you could still rebroadcast to YouTube or something. Yeah. Maybe you could still sell.
Yeah, we lost some of those real dear ones. I'm telling you, they were great.
Is your Sunday sermon going to be on YouTube? Or on Zoom?
Those are always on there.
Yeah, your independent sermon. Could you give us a little hint as far as what I know you were talking about community and about, even the lunch you ate has, been brought to you by someone else.
Actually, I'm leaning towards using Moses's Choose Life text for Sunday. I think I'm going to do that because, we've been given, we're all going through this pandemic and things are not going well, folks, as I'm sure you're aware of. And, I've got members of my church working hard in hospitals. I'm really concerned about them. And, we've been given, we know what can help with this. Are we going to do it? And so I'm reminded of Moses up there saying, folks, here are the laws. Here's what you can do for life. Are you going to do it or not? Choose life or choose death, So I'm leaning towards using that text for Sunday, possibly.
That's a great idea. I'm going to be borrowing that, not for this Saturday, but maybe the Saturday after that. Any other questions before we conclude?
Is that in Deuteronomy or Exodus?
Which one?
The choose life text. Is that in?
Oh, from the it is, I thought it was from Exodus.
I think it is Exodus. Yeah. Okay. Thought so.
But Deuteronomy is a retelling of Exodus, so sometimes they repeat it in there. So I want to thank the very Reverend Billy Hester for joining us here today. Well, this will be on YouTube. He also didn't mention that he's in a lot of different organizations. He started one of his own that we had going on for a while. It was great. And there's a lot of other organizations he's a part of. He's been everywhere at the same time. And his wife, Sherry, is a wonderful person as well. So we're so thrilled. I did used to eat with him once a month. We had our monthly meeting, but that obviously is postponed for a little while now. Next week, we have the great pleasure of interviewing Michael and Marion Hofstein. In case you don't know them, they used to live in Savannah. He is a very well-known TV director, directing a lot of TV shows through the years. And she is a world-renowned stunt woman and has been she's one of the, what do we call it? Although I think she's starting to retire a little bit now. She's in her 60s, which I can imagine is very difficult after all that wear and tear, but she's starting to, she's kind of like the matriarch of the current stunt women in the world. So and she also is an actress. So in a lot of the movies that she was a stunt woman, she also had a small part. So they're a powerhouse couple who've been all over the world. They're kind of retired now, but they're helping. He was working with his daughter. She just did a wonderful documentary, which was shown here during the Jewish Film Festival. So that'll be next week, Michael and Marion Hofstein. I want to thank our wonderful Billy Hester again. If anybody wants to see really how it should be done online or live, obviously not live now, but you can go to their website, and they've been putting everything on there for years. And I was always very jealous. So we're a step behind, but now we've finally gotten on the same boat at least. So it's really been a pleasure. So thank you. And again, we'll see everybody next week. If anybody wants to see this wonderful one, again, you can see it on YouTube, and we will be having our class at 10:30 tomorrow. So everyone be safe. And if you need anything from us, please let us know. Thank you again, Billy. Really terrific as always.
Blessings and peace to you. Thank you for being the wonderful faith community that you are. Y'all are a blessing.
It
Thank
is a
you.
pleasure to be working with you. And I'll see everybody later, hopefully very soon.
Blessings. Peace.